All right, we have our panel in place. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you the facilitator for this afternoon's Sea Deep in Innovation panel on climate resilience. Fiona Gain is a community planner at Barrett Planning Group, where she supports the development of plans grounded in social and environmental resiliency. Fiona has completed work on transit-oriented development and is developing skills related to zoning and municipal grants. She is particularly interested in how zoning can be used to accomplish urban design standards informed by existing conditions and community visioning. Fiona holds a master's degree in urban and environmental policy and planning from Tufts University, a master's degree in energy policy and climate from Johns Hopkins University, and a bachelor's degree in environmental science from the University of Florida. In her spare time, she enjoys exploring art-based hobbies and perfecting croissants?
Yes.
See, I have astigmatism, and it's a small print on my phone, so I was really unsure if that was croissants, but I look forward to talking more about that. A nod to her French heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fiona Gain.
Wow. What a thorough introduction. Thank you so much. So after hearing discussions on long-term planning and innovations taking place in Plymouth, we're extending our reach of discussion into climate change and resiliency. It's crucial that communities learn to incorporate facets of sustainability into all parts of their planning. The industries fundamental to harbor economies and blue economies depend on the unique environmental conditions of the coast to thrive, and these conditions will change. It's inevitable. And the long-term viability of economic growth depend on our work to adapt and anticipate the effects of climate change. So today, I'd like to talk about the role of innovation in climate resiliency, considerations to technological and policy tools to address climate change, and how inclusive, comprehensive communication can strengthen the physical and social infrastructure critical to adaptation. So I guess we'll go down the line. I have introductions prepared for you all, but in case I've missed anything, we can take some time. To my right is Brian Sweat, the City of Boston's first Chief Climate Officer. Brian, I don't know if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for inviting me down to Plymouth. I don't get a chance to leave the 48 square miles of Boston very often. But what drew me down here is just the common cause that we have in Boston with Plymouth and the surrounding South Shore community around climate resilience necessities in our ocean. And having the ocean not only be at risk to climate change, but be part of our solution set, both in terms of decarbonizing our built environment and our way of life, and needing to be more resilient to the impacts of climate change that we know are happening today. Last week was our king tide, our wicked high tide, as we like to refer to it in Boston, seasonally. Unfortunately, the wind was blowing in the opposite direction, so we did not have significant flooding events. But we know that the ocean on which so much of our economy and way of life and enjoyment in Boston resides is changing rapidly in front of us and presenting a challenge that is generational and that is existential, for Boston's next 100 years. We're approaching our 400th in 2030. So look forward to the conversation. Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. We also have Bill Nye. Thank you again for joining us for this additional panel. I don't know if you have anything additional you'd like to say.
Well, just that everybody's working together is very important. And people talk about what's the solution. I don't think there is a single solution to whatever problem we have. We're going to have a combination of seawalls, and then wouldn't it be good if we stopped warming the world so the ocean wasn't getting bigger? And so we're all in this together, is my message. So I have a question, though. What do you do as the Boston, are you in charge of the environment? What's the title? Seriously, it's cool.
I'm supposed to stop the climate from changing.
So good.
I'm the Chief Climate Officer. We describe ourselves as the hub of the universe, so we might as well. We're going to solve this right here in Boston.
Go Mariners.
Ouch.
And then finally, we have Chad McGuire, an environmental law and policy professor at UMass Dartmouth.
Hello.
Well, it's an example. We've got to have policies working with technical changes, working with energy production, working with farming. It's got to start with policies, right?
Yes. Yes, it does.
There.
It begins
Done.
and ends with policies, I think, yes.
It begins and ends with policies. Well, go ahead, get started.
Well, so one of the things that I look at and study, my background is in law, and I have a law degree, but I also have a background in science, environmental science in particular, bachelor's and master's degrees. So I look at coastal areas, I look at our sort of regulatory, our human-made environments, and I look at how they apply to our natural environments, and I look at change. I look at how they're changing. Businesses need consistency. So if I'm thinking about this audience in general, or people that are thinking about what does it mean to have a blue economy in this area of the country, in this region in Massachusetts, in this coastal region, particularly like Plymouth, for example, or Boston or many other areas around here, which is unique in the way that it looks, unique in the way that it's formed. But so what I do is I look at that and say, what makes a stable business environment? How can business make stable decisions about the future? And part of that is, how does government support business activity? What does it do? What does it not do? What has it done in the past, and what might be changing? What's changing in terms of insurance, for example, which is, shifting risk, right? Because risk is always there. We understand risk is increasing over time. So the question then becomes, what do I know about the risk? Is that risk changing in the future? And then how am I mitigating that risk? And what's government doing to help me mitigate that risk? Or is government putting the onus on me as a private citizen, as a business, something like that?
So you said we all know that risk is increasing.
I think if you look at, if we didn't
So what's
know,
the risk you're talking about?
the risk, the climate risk in general. So if you're living in a coastal region, the risk is, flooding, increased storm frequency, intensity, the ability to have insurance against certain types of losses that might occur, having a business model that depends on certain things being one way, but you can't rely on that thing being that certain way. There's an unlimited amount of risk. I mean, anybody that's in business understands, depending on their business area, there's already inherent risks in their industry. So then the question is, what does climate have to say? And then what does it mean to be resilient? What does that mean? What's the operational definition?
Yes,
of
what
that
is,
term?
yeah, hey man, what is climate resilience?
I assume that's for me.
I made that up. No, I see that. I see mitigation and resilience, and then everybody's worship word, sustainability. And so go ahead.
Yeah, I think from our perspective in Boston, our three focus, well, broadly speaking first, resilience is more than just about physical resilience. It's about social and institutional resilience. It's about how do we respond to shocks and stresses. Before joining the Wu administration, I had the opportunity to work for a phenomenal engineering firm called Arup, which worked with Rockefeller on the Resilient Cities Framework and Resilient Cities Index. And resilience is really, it's as much about people and institutions as it is about physical resilience. And we are faced with all sorts of shocks and stresses, some of which you mentioned in the previous conversation around attacks on science, around attacks on institutions. But the here and now about climate resilience is that we're facing unprecedented environmental and hazard-based shock events that are disrupting our built environment in a way that it wasn't designed for. So in Boston, climate resilience really focuses on three key elements, one being extreme heat. We know we are experiencing more extreme heat days in Boston than we ever have before, and we anticipate that to continue. Extreme precipitation events, and we've seen those in Massachusetts, in Vermont, elsewhere, where it's a deluge of rain that is overwhelming stormwater systems. And then lastly, most germane to this conversation, is extreme coastal storms. And so for us in Boston, the ocean, as I mentioned before, is, it's why Boston and Massachusetts exist. As an economic entity, we have always been ocean-based. How that was designed for has changed significantly. 1/6 of Boston's landmass is filled tidelands. We stopped filling tidelands about 100 years ago, and we expected the ocean to stay still and to stay put. That is clearly not the case. We've experienced about 10 inches of sea level rise since the early 1900s. We're anticipating 3 to 6 feet more by the end of this century. So when we look out at what is at risk in Boston, and this is why it's exciting to be down here, because this is a regional and state conversation. It's not just the 1/6 of Boston's landmass, but it's the 10% plus of Massachusetts jobs that exist in that coastal flood resilience overlay district in Boston. So it is a significant portion of the Massachusetts economy that the do-nothing scenario, and the folks in Washington would like to think that I don't need a job and I'd love to retire and declare success on climate change. But the reality is if we do nothing, the last 400 years of building up a Massachusetts economy that is robust and exciting and a great place to live, work, and play is a risk. So I think that's...
So what are you guys doing?
So we've really, for us, the canary in the mine shaft moment was the near miss of Superstorm Sandy. And folks may remember back in 2012, coming up actually almost to the day when we're meeting today, we experienced a near miss of a 1 in 100-year storm event, not by miles, but by minutes.
So what
it
makes it a 1 in 100 year? You guys, I'm very troubled by that. This is a 1 in 1,000 year flood. No, it's like
Well, I was going to get to that point.
1 in 100 year storm. They're happening all the time.
Yes, and so that's what. So since then, so that was really that mine shift, that canary in the mine shaft moment, where we've been focusing on planning for what those types of storms mean and how often are they happening. So 3 of the last 4 high water marks in Boston's history have happened in the last 7 years. Most of these
Wow.
were actually.
When was the other one?
So 2018, Winter Storm Grayson, there was one in 2021 and one in 2024.
What's the 4th one?
The Superstorm of 78. So the
Oh,
snow event that
78,
everybody remembers, that shut down the region.
Disco era.
They even read about it in Seattle, but it did shut down. It shut down most of Eastern Mass for several weeks. So for us, we've been spending about a decade of planning, and we've mapped out in Boston what sea level rise and storm surge means for all 47 miles of our shoreline, and we're really transitioning to a decade of action. And as Fiona mentioned, I'm the first person to assume the role of Chief Climate Officer. We established also within my cabinet an Office of Climate Resilience. Because we want a solely focused entity of government to deliver the climate resilience we need on our shoreline in a way that expands economic opportunity, expands public access and equity, in a way that sort of reinforces the fact that we are an oceanfront city and an oceanfront region and state.
And I wanted to expand also on the question that Bill was asked earlier, speaking on innovation, emerging practices, especially in coastal areas. What practices do you see as pivotal in your 10-year plan in looking to the short-term and long-term to implement to address the impacts of sea level rise and climate change?
Yeah, I'll give sort of 2 categories of answer, and I'd be interested to see other responses. One is our regulatory systems have not been designed for this type of a challenge in terms of how much we need to rethink what our shoreline looks and feels like over time. By intent and largely successfully, our regulatory system was to slow down and stop bad development on our shoreline. We now need to flip that mindset fundamentally and enable and speed up the right types of climate protective infrastructure on our shoreline. And so that means we need to rethink our permitting process, our regulatory process. There's a lot. Are there state legislators in the room? I know that there were a couple who were on the list before. There's a lot.
Unwilling to raise their
I was going to be positive, but there's a lot.
dark sunglasses with the hat pulled down.
The Resilient Mass, the environmental bond bill is called Resilient Mass, and there's a lot of really important permitting reform aspects in that bill. And we need to also rethink that most of Boston, and my guess is significant portions of Plymouth, the shoreline that we have now is man-made. It is not natural. It was constructed over the last 300-400 years, and we need to then give ourselves the freedom to adapt it and evolve it correctly, and not treat it as if it is, natural marsh,
Set
not
in
treat it as
stone,
natural beach. Exactly.
if you will.
Because it's not. It will be overwhelmed over time. So I think 1 is rethink our permitting regulatory process, and 2, and you mentioned sort of building walls. We need different technologies for coastal sea protection. So we have a great partnership with the Stone Living Lab in Boston, where we're doing living wall systems. How can we bring back the concept of coral reefs in places for habitat as we are building as naturalized as possible, because it can be nature involved but not nature based in a lot of these urban shorelines in ways that use low weight concrete and fill. We need to adapt some of these technologies uses also sort of embodied carbon, as an emphasis, so we're not contributing to climate change. But we need different technologies that aren't just the traditional berms and seawalls that you've seen elsewhere, largely because we've been phenomenally successful in Boston and elsewhere providing public access to our waterfront. We have a harbor walk almost entirety across 46 miles Boston's harborfront. We don't want our solution to climate change to involve less access to our shoreline. It needs to reinforce access to the shoreline.
And
I'm thinking deep thoughts. So how do you change policies to enable proactive shoreline management? Is that
Yeah.
phrase?
Yep. So Boston's interesting, and Boston is unique because most of it is developed. Back Bay is not called Back Bay for a cute reason. Back Bay is called Back Bay because it used to be a bay, right? It used to be underwater. A lot of Boston, how much of Boston is filled?
1/6.
1/6 of Boston, right? So
Is landfill?
it's filled, yeah. It used to be water. I think Faneuil Hall, where did the water go to?
Well, it goes you can see the line between City Hall and Faneuil Hall.
Yeah.
And Long Wharf, which was, used to be the longest wharf in the country, went all the way up to the beginning of Faneuil Hall.
So a lot of areas you think of Boston as being just hard soil Boston isn't. It's historically wasn't. It's a matter of human development, human change. And you think of the two rivers, you think of the Charles, what a pretty river, right? It looks nothing like the Neponset. There's three rivers, right? The Mystic, the Charles, and the Neponset. But the Mystic and the Charles were dammed years and years, centuries ago. And you see this very well-developed, human-made, it looks like a canal, really, right? It doesn't look like a natural river. Again, the Neponset would be an example of something more natural. As you're coming into Boston, that one with looks like all of the big tall grass and that sort of thing. But the point is, Boston is unique in many ways, and you have to think about Boston and deal with Boston differently. Boston isn't going to move away, right? So Boston's choices aren't, I'm going to run away from the shoreline.
What about Plymouth? Are we going to move Plymouth?
That's what I'm getting at. So the point is, you have to look at the area that you live in, and you have to think about what it is, what it looks like, and what are the possibilities, and you build around that. You build your zoning, you build your regulatory environment around that, and around new information. You don't shy away from difficult information, Once upon a time, we had no zoning really in the United States. If you could hold land and you built something on it, good for you, right? There was no building standards, there were no storm water standards, there were no fire standards, nothing like that. There were no rules about how you did something, but then we learned. We had a bunch of fires in nascent cities, think of Chicago, different things like that, and we said, we have to start making rules about how we do these, building standards, so on and so forth. We've learned new information about our environment, so we're not talking about anything new. This job is necessary in Boston because we have a new layer of information that we've realized. And so we have to take that information into account and make special rules for Boston. Same thing for Plymouth, same thing for different areas. You think of undeveloped areas, coastlines that are undeveloped, a lot of that probably should be protected and probably shouldn't be developed, depending on the circumstances. But again, it depends on where you are.
in the areas that are developed, you need an efficient, reliable energy grid to support all of that. And so what are the main obstacles in pursuing widespread renewable energy and decarbonization efforts in coastal areas?
Are you guys talking about wind turbines?
You can bring that up, yeah.
Oh, I'll mention wind turbines.
Yeah.
I think they're fine. Just as a whiner and complainer, I grew up in the city of Washington, D.C. You go to what in that area you call the beach. It's just like the shore. In New Jersey, they say the shore. And so what happens? Everybody sits on the beach, and what's the most exciting thing? When does everybody go crazy? When there's a ship. There's a ship. Look, Billy, there's a ship. Something's moving. Cool. You get used to wind turbines in no time, you guys. I mean, in Minnesota, I was in South Dakota last summer, they're just huge wind turbines. You get quite used to them. I'm not saying you want one everywhere, but they certainly are not as intrusive as people apparently believe. And if you want to kill birds, if that's your thing, build coal-fired power plants. If birds is what you're after, burn coal. So I don't live around here, but I know it's a controversial thing. Man, oh man. But in Denmark, it works very well, right? And everybody gets along. Back to you.
I share Bill's excitement for the potential of offshore wind. I think one of the areas that we don't talk about enough in Massachusetts and Boston, and we're going to be talking about it a lot more, is the thermal capacity of the ocean. We talk about sort of offshore wind is the only way of generating renewable power. There are some parts of the country where we're talking about wave currents and we're talking about tidal, but the thermal capacity.
So you're talking about a heat engine
Heat exchange.
between the deep
Yeah.
ocean and the surface?
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be the deep
Cool.
ocean, because you don't need to go that deep to get constant 40-degree water. It's about that thermal exchange. Boston Harbor, the way it's shaped, has 100% changeover in water once every 3 days. So it is eminently renewable in terms of temperature, and we talk about the challenges of heating and cooling Boston in a way that is renewable. We're sitting on this massive thermal source of energy. And geothermal gets a lot of attention these days on drilling pipes into the ground. That is expensive, those are pipes.
Oh, but we're really good at it.
We're really good at drilling.
No,
There
people
folks-
are
yeah.
great at drilling. Man, oh man.
So I'm excited about looking at sort of those opportunities. And then the other you asked for sort of challenges of this. That's, what we've been talking about is on the supply side. The other big challenge is distribution, right? Making sure that you have a resilient electric grid or thermal grid in a changing climate. Electricity doesn't like to get wet, in particular with salt water and that infrastructure. And so how do we make sure that it is protected and resilient? Because as we electrify, that means we're putting more eggs in one basket from a resilience perspective, and we still have really cold winters in Plymouth and in Boston. We need the heat to be on. We need backup power sources that are non-fossil fuel based, and we need the power system to be more reliable.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is we've seen an incredible example over the past decade of a policy, a national policy of advancing, whether you want to call it renewable energies or sustainable energies, but wind and solar effectively. And if you look at the scaled level, at the production level, the large scale for massive energy uses, both electricity, solar, and wind have now, in terms of wholesale prices at that industrial level, right? They're incredibly competitive. They're cheaper than coal for sure. They're cheaper than natural gas. They become incredibly competitive on their own because we've had a federal policy that's allowed scale to occur, allowed private business and enterprise to develop this and bring it to scale. And once they have, it's wonderful. So there are other ways to generate electricity, energy, without using carbon as an input or as a main input. And those things can be incredibly competitive when we get them to scale. We've proven that. It happened a lot faster than anybody assumed in terms of the prices, if you look at the price differentials for doing it at wholesale. So that's something that we can do, and then you know how government does this. Government offers carrots and incentives to allow businesses to move into new areas. I don't think Tesla would exist as a company if it didn't have, right, the credits that it received, the federal credits, because it's an automobile, if nobody knows this, it's an automobile manufacturer, but early on, it didn't make any money, and all that it could sell were the credits from California and from the federal government to give to other companies in California that generated more carbon output than they were allowed to, so they could buy that. And that was extremely lucrative for the company early on. That allowed a company to move up to scale. It's one example of many where government does put its thumb on the scale and incentivize different industries, new industries, and that could be incredibly helpful in trying to solve whether if you want to decarbonize, your energy infrastructure.
You alluded to something which I feel is at the heart of the problem. And I enjoy the Wall Street Journal, like anybody. Does anybody read the Wall Street Journal? Yeah. Anyway, it's like two newspapers. There's all this cool news, and then there's the editorial page. They're just spiritually opposed to climate change. It's like there's no such thing. And so that leads me to this problem, this continual comparison of the price per kilowatt hour of wind or solar or battery storage or geothermal, continually comparing that to natural gas burning for electrical production. But the problem is bigger than just 1-for-1 price per kilowatt hour, for crying out loud. The climate's changing, man. So it's getting that message across is really at the heart of our policy problems. You guys, it's not just about competing with 200-year-old natural gas technology. We have this much bigger problem. And what I want, I was born here in the States. I want the U.S. to lead. I don't want to mess around while people in other parts of the world outcompete us. So Get this done, people, will you?
We're-
Solve all the policy problems, the mitigation problems, and the electrical grid.
We
Thank
also
you.
talk, and I'm sure you have more questions. We also talk about the price of renewables versus non-renewables in sort of a daily spot market perspective.
Yeah,
One of
right.
the other advantages of
Yeah.
most of the sources of renewable power is they're high fixed costs but very low operating costs.
Yeah.
So we can sign agreements, and we do in Boston, in our Boston Community Choice Energy, we sign 2-year power purchase agreements guareteeing the price of 100% renewable power. That is very different than if you're on the, every 6 months your rate's changing based on Eversource filing rate cases. We can sign 15, 30-year contracts fixing the price of wind to something that's predictable. And when you ask folks that are feeling an affordability crisis what stresses them out, it's not just the real cost of living, it's the constant change and fear that those prices are going up. So the more we can do to lock in prices that are at a reasonable price for a predictable and longer period of time, the better off folks are from planning their budgets, from understanding what fiscal sustainability can look like, and then we can manage those other costs that are more volatile.
Any objective economist, almost anyone, would tell you that it's a deal, and it's exactly something that we should do, and if we did, it would be the best deal for all of us for all the right reasons. We'd have very cheap energy, we'd have a great infrastructure, and the infrastructure would be, by the way, resilient. Oil is a global market price, right? So a number of the things that we consider our natural resources, they're subject to other forces that we don't control. But when you build this kind of infrastructure, like if you build windmills off of Massachusetts, once that infrastructure is in place, the wind comes to Massachusetts. We don't have to dig it up. We don't have to find it. The solar, of course, comes from the sun. No big deal there. But so, to Bill's point, when you include the cost of carbon and the damages, if you're doing that analysis, which can be easily done, it's an extremely good deal. But even when you don't, it's still a good deal.
So why is you brought this up, Fiona, I believe, because it's controversial. Wind turbines off the coast are controversial. Yeah?
I think that wasn't my purpose for the question, but I think.
She didn't mention wind turbines either.
Yeah.
Well, she said offshore.
Yeah.
What else goes on offshore for energy production?
I don't believe I mentioned offshore, Bill.
So
I hate
I'm
to
putting
say-
words in her mouth. I'm here for you. All right, carry on.
No, of course. Just don't want to step in hot water if I can avoid it.
So why is it hot water? That's my question to everybody. Why are people opposed to offshore wind turbines, especially when they're over the horizon or virtually over the horizon? What is the deal? What is the concern? I'm not from around here.
So in my neck of the woods, New Bedford is right next door. I'm in Dartmouth, so New Bedford's next door, and that's where the staging is happening, right? So all of the wind turbines, they're being staged in New Bedford. They put aside a big chunk of the pier. The Scandinavian folks are there, doing the work, and but a bunch of local jobs are there, but the company, that's monitoring this and helping us because they figured out how to do this well. That's all happening, and it's great. Economic activity, great. Those jobs are wonderful. They're well-paying jobs, really good paying jobs, especially for one of our gateway cities, New Bedford, for the people down there. It's a really good deal in many ways. The way that I look at some of this is, it's weird. Humans are funny because we love stories. We live and die with stories. And the first thing that I always have to remind myself is, if all humans went away, if we all went away tomorrow, what would still be real today? Like, what would still be real on the earth if humans weren't here to make up a story about it? And I think of, so that's the starting point. And the problem is, when you ask yourself, why don't I like wind turbines? That has to be a story, right? There's a reason for it, for sure. I don't know if there's an empirical reason, but there's a reason, and it's usually normative, meaning it's subjective, and it depends on groups. And if somebody has a good story to tell, and I like it, I might agree with them, even if I don't have a strong opinion about wind turbines. And there I am. I'm supporting no wind turbines because I like the story that I heard. We're so pre-programmed.
Tell us that story.
Not liking wind turbines?
Yeah.
Well, way back in the day, I've spoken to a lot of people that live on the coastline, and I've told them that things are changing and there's danger and that sort of thing, and I can see in the crowd, everybody's looking at me, and I know what they're saying. They're saying, do you think I'm an idiot? That's what they're saying to me because they bought a house along the water themselves. They say, would I do something like that? Would I do something dangerous? I've made a lot of money in my life. How do you think I afforded that multi-million-dollar home, by the way, which I know you can't afford? This is what I'm saying they're saying to me in their heads, you know? So I don't know what you think you know about this, but I don't make mistakes. I'm a smart person. I'm a good business person. So you don't know what you're talking about.
So
I think it begins there, and then it moves into maybe my kids like to see that ship go by on the beach, but I don't want to see those things out there.
Oh, that's what it is. They don't want to see them.
Yeah, I don't want to see that thing out there. Not that they can. But yeah, I think that's part of it, and then it moves into other things. I think it's just it's a connection to other things.
No, I mean, I would broadly agree with that. I think we have spent decades building our infrastructure in certain parts of the country to serve, in certain parts of our communities, in certain parts of Massachusetts, to serve other parts, right? And I can tell you, when I look out my window to the alternative from City Hall, I can see when a natural gas tanker is coming into the Boston Harbor to be offloaded in Everett, because it needs to be protected by the Coast Guard, because it is very much a man-made terrorism target, floating in the densest part of New England, floating through, goes to get offshored, goes to get onshored, serves power plants that also are not usually visible from our coastline, but for places like Plymouth that have ones nearby. But everybody in this Commonwealth still wants to flip the switch and have the power come on. And we've had this for generations now, of this being produced away and having no visual impacts, not fully appreciating the environmental impacts. And that is now shifting. And I personally think in a very positive way that I want to see green power, because I know that makes me feel like we are starting to solve this problem that is existential to our way of life. And that to me is a sign of progress. And if that means fewer ships coming into Boston Harbor, filled with natural gas, that's a positive that we experience in the city. But I think a lot of this is rooted in environmental justice and climate justice, or environmental injustice and climate injustice over generations of infrastructure creation that have allowed many of us, including myself, to not daily have to see the costs of the infrastructure that we rely on.
Yeah. And I think that expands into my next question about these negative externalities that marginalized communities often face the burden of. So how do we minimize those impacts in communities while investing in those physical interventions in that infrastructure that is essential for resiliency?
Yeah, I can say in Boston, we're actually trying to flip that question on its head, in the sense of saying that climate action is an opportunity to bring restitution, to rectify climate injustice through disproportionate investment in climate solutions that have benefits for those communities. So when I talk about...
What's an example of a climate solution?
I get you.
No, go ahead.
So, for example, one of the projects that we're beginning to scale up when we look at affordable housing, and we look at the Boston Housing Authority, which has over 10,000 units of housing, Mayor Wu, to her great credit, rather than saying affordable housing is hard to decarbonize, she leaned in and said, if we can do it there, we can do it anywhere. Let's start here. And so we are bringing geothermal infrastructure, affordable housing, but one of the most exciting sort of co-benefits is we're bringing induction cooktops to affordable housing. One of the largest complaints of pediatricians is around asthma and missed school for kids in environmental conditions. These are like, if you designed a system today from a health perspective, where you say, I want natural gas burning continuously in my kitchen surrounded by kids in places where there's also mold and mildew, we'd never design a system like that. And so if we can get our indoor environment to be cleaner through decarbonization and climate action, that win-win pays for itself in lost school days, in asthma attacks, in public health costs. And so I think we are focusing on, the untold secret here in this room is I'm going to be pushing a lot of agendas in Boston that don't lead with the climate benefit. But climate and decarbonization is the end result, but it's a public health cause. It's a jobs cause. It's a community engagement cause.
What's another example? Natural gas, that's pretty cool. What's another example?
Power and resilience. So solar panels with battery backup, in areas that traditionally the grid is overwhelmed anyways, and when power goes down and you have people on, ventilators, you have people who need dialysis machines, like bringing resilience, that becomes a problem. People don't want to be evacuated from their homes, so how do we bring resilience? So right now, the incentives in Massachusetts, and both statewide and locally, and with federal incentives as long as they last, for solar and battery backup are really significant. And so can we get low-income housing, can we get apartment buildings to be more resilient, to have greener solutions, and be able to bring that benefit to more folks. So I would say, and the other attribute, because I know we're talking about climate resilience, which is not just power resilience, the neighborhoods that we're looking at protecting we want to bring access to the waterfront. So we are, if you come to Boston, I'd invite you guys to visit many of our shoreline parks that we're investing in. We are discreetly including climate resilient infrastructure into those berms, into the parks, to protect the neighborhoods behind it. So when you're sitting on a bench and there's like a nice sloped area behind you, you don't know you're sitting on the seawall. And you don't know that we can close it off in the event of a storm. It just looks like, there's some interesting elevation.
They've almost finished all the way around.
Big U, yeah. So that same concept here, and I'm very proud of.
You see it right here, I'm drawing it on the tablecloth.
We can hold it up like that. No, if you get to Lower Manhattan, and you haven't been there in the last couple of years, go walk Lower Manhattan and see the projects that they have accomplished, and we're certainly using that as inspiration.
And that was also a result of Hurricane Sandy.
That was a result of the actual damage. I'm very proud that Boston, Massachusetts, we have done more work before the storm than I think any other region in the country, not through recovery efforts, and we did not get the recovery dollars that New York got from Sandy, but because we knew we missed that by a matter of minutes, not miles. And I should have explained what I meant by that. When Sandy hit, it was 5 hours off of our high tide. So if it had hit same trajectory at Lower Manhattan 5 hours earlier, we would have had the same impacts that they had in Manhattan. So that's by luck, and we've had a dozen of those since then, of just high water storm events happening just off of high tide. That is part of, and I assume Plymouth has sort of similar challenges. Our tides are really significantly variable. So the difference between high tide and medium tide is significant. If it hits at our high tide at like 12
It's variable, but very predictable.
It's predictable, but it's a wide range. We have big tides in Boston, particularly in the Four-Point Channel, swings, so.
So just to the point, the fundamental point from a policy standpoint is it's hard maybe for most of us. It's like if you have basic means, or if the world gets hotter and it's 3, 4, 5 degrees hotter on average in the summer, you have air conditioning in your home. Or if you don't, you'll get air conditioning because that's affordable. Or if you're worried about the power going out, you'll buy, you have solar panels and you have a power wall, or you'll have a battery bank, or you'll get a natural gas. If you use natural gas, you'll have a Generac. You'll have some sort of like an emergency thing. These are all things that are available to people that have means. It's disproportionate in the sense that when you have heat, when you have an effective heat and increasing heat events, there are those that can deal with it and mitigate the effects. They can self-regulate, and there are many that can't. And so when you develop policies, usually what you're looking to is you're trying to look at it, just like you would for cancer rates or what exposure rates. You'd look at people that are most likely to be harmed by that exposure, maybe young children, people with medical conditions or elderly, that sort of thing. You'd look at that. So developing policies around we want to do this not because 60% of the people will benefit from it because they've already self-regulated because it's going to help 40, 30, 40% of the people, but through the adoption over time, it fundamentally helps all of us. Heat pumps might be somewhat controversial in some manner, but the great thing about heat pumps, as they get better at generating heat in our cold winters, is they're automatic air conditioning, right? Guaranteed air conditioning. So if you have a heat pump, you guaranteed have air conditioning in the summer, which is huge because there are still a lot of places around the country where folks don't have air conditioning or access to air conditioning. So that's a real problem.
So I'll give you a riff on Chad's comments. I'll give you a quick policy example because I think it is important how we embed this climate justice in policy. So in Boston, we have a building emissions reduction ordinance. So all big buildings in Boston over 15,000 square feet or 15 units have now targets for carbon emissions from now through 2050 that gradually increase over time and get you down to zero. It's only 5% of the building stock, but those buildings represent 40% of the city's emissions profile, so a massive chunk.
So
let me just finish this quick story. And then we know that buildings are going to decarbonize over time, and there are going to be times where the physical emissions from their energy use on a building may be over their target amount. So we have what's called alternative compliance payments to make up that difference. At the moment, it's $234 a ton. That money goes into an equitable emissions investment fund, which goes out through RFP and grants to support decarbonization of affordable housing in environmental justice neighborhoods. And that is just as valuable a compliance method as reducing it on site because a ton of carbon, it doesn't matter where in Boston that's being reduced, but it provides that very significant return on investment in terms of both health benefits and energy reduction and decarbonization in affordable housing to put in the heat pumps that you're talking about for owners that wouldn't otherwise have that access to capital. And so that's a way and we want the big buildings that are, using alternative compliance fans to be with us in the groundbreakings and the ribbon cuttings of those projects, because it's their investment that is helping support, decarbonization and environmental justice communities.
That is a good policy example from my perspective. That's a great one.
So when you say decarbonize, you're talking about making the furnace more efficient, double pane glass, or are you talking about credits?
Yeah, so it usually starts with weatherization and energy efficiency. So the first thing we can do is make your envelope tight. Before you make the envelope tight, you have to make sure that the indoor environment is clean and healthy. So you have to deal with mold and mildew issues. You have to make sure you have a good indoor environmental. You need good electric infrastructure. Then you talk about decarbonizing the systems. So for most small buildings, it's going to be electrifying systems. It's going to be heat pumps with battery backup, with some solar power. For larger ones, it can be geothermal systems. We're doing networked and district geothermal systems. So how do we use the temperature of the ground, to create systems that can offset that demand? That is really important for meds and eds. Those are campuses that usually have such energy intensity that you cannot electrify. The grid won't support it. Those transformers are too large for those nodes of the grid. So it is finding non-fossil fuel-based, non-emission-based systems and the equipment that run off them to meet our heating, cooling, and
It's
power
exciting, you guys. Come on. Second law of thermodynamics, man. Let's go.
I mean, it will be the largest turnover in how we operate buildings since the advent of air conditioning, right? I mean, it's that scale of investment we're talking about in buildings in Massachusetts.
Okay. And I know we have a short list of priorities. We try and strategize and make a few actions first, but all the while we are addressing this entire system of climate. And so I'm wondering, how do you incorporate systems thinking in your strategies where you tie in, and maybe you spoke to this already, but making subtle movements towards climate preparedness in housing or in job policy? Like, how do you kind of broaden it in that way?
Yeah, I mean, in Boston, we're trying to take a systems-based approach, and it's not single systems, it's integrated systems. So for too often we think about, in particular, the way the Massachusetts government is organized, but like electric systems, gas systems, we don't regulate steam, transportation.
We don't regulate steam.
Not in Massachusetts, yeah. So that's not regulated by the Public Utility Commission, so it doesn't go through rate cases, so that's a whole other panel. Transportation infrastructure, waste infrastructure, water infrastructure, they all tie together, and then if, my colleague who runs the streets cabinet was up there, he'd say, and they all go in the same streets, right? But we don't coordinate systems, and we don't coordinate infrastructure, we tend to hide
So
it
you
and
don't
wait for it to-
coordinate the street systems in Boston. That is no surprise.
No, sorry.
No, I'm giving you a hard
correct that in case
time.
folks- We try to coordinate them.
Driving in Boston is this an adventure.
The systems are not coordinated below the street by the system owners. They have to be coordinated by the streets cabinet that is that has to coordinate what's below grade, because only so much will fit. So when we talk about this decarbonized infrastructure, it has to go somewhere. It has to get to the buildings and the places that people are going to be using it. So that is part of that systems challenge. So that is the building up in terms of how we build out the infrastructure ecosystems that cities rely on. From a top-down perspective, one of the areas where I think we'll fail, to go back to your initial conversation with Vicki on science communication, is we haven't defined where we're going and why. Like, what is a decarbonized, resilient, just, affordable, vibrant city and commonwealth in 2050 that we want to live in? And then how are we getting there? Because at the moment, we're doing sort of piecemeal change on 5-year plans, on 10-year plans. We're not defining and designing what and envisioning
Well, that's
where we
the
want to
big
go.
goal, right, of zero emissions by blank.
But zero is it's a very hard goal to motivate folks. It's a less than. I want a vibrant community with more access to the water, with more habitat, with more recreation opportunities, with more jobs. We need to define where we're going that isn't a less than. And I want folks to get behind that for 2050. The same way you mentioned, NASA and getting to the moon and space exploration. That was visionary, that motivated a level of investment that's similar to solving climate change, and yet we constantly talk about climate change as being something we're giving up.
See, that is incorrect. No, you want a higher quality of life.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So about the landing on the moon, you guys, just everybody keep in mind, that was the Cold War. I mean, people talk about this wonderful science that was done with moon rocks and stuff. That was us versus them. And does climate change have that quality?
I mean, I would argue that clean energy has that quality, and that is the solution to climate change. And we are losing that battle at the moment to China and other countries.
To go to my story narrative, if I can, and really quickly, Boston is an excellent walking city, just to counter Bill's point about you can't drive in Boston, which is very true.
Yeah, that's good. That's
because
better
it was
answer.
built before roads, right? Built before
But
automobiles.
that guy,
I should
he's
say.
still on the MTA. He can't get off.
Yeah, right?
Charlie.
Charlie.
A kid because I
Stuck
love.
with that token.
That's right.
It's a wonderful walking city. But that's the narrative I stick with when it comes to Boston. It's great to walk around Boston and take the T. But in terms of overall narrative, I would say that most of us, nobody really, climate change is never going to be a Cold War issue. It's never going to be something that people jump into and say, this is a story that makes sense to me, because everything is done in a way where it says, look, do something different yourself. This is the hard part we've had historically. Make individual change. Buy a much more expensive vehicle that you have to charge and have anxiety about, if you want to make a 300-mile trip, good luck, find a charge. It's getting better, by the way, but you understand. Some of you might understand. So change your vehicle, do different things, make some expensive choices, but your individual choices might not have a collectively rational outcome, might not come to a good collective effect. So it's a story that affects us all, unlike, I think, the moon race. I think the Cold War affected people, but disparately, and the idea is we weren't all working at NASA as a country. One difference is that we're all members of NASA, to use the analogy, if we're all supposed to change our individual behavior. I think the thing that needs to happen from a policy is we stick at the large-scale level, the federal, the state, the federal for sure, with a specific strategy, and then everybody just simply conforms over time to that strategy. That's what happens. If many of you are in the business field, the most important thing for most businesses is consistency. It's knowing what tomorrow will bring, is knowing what the rules are and that the rules aren't going to change, because businesses conform their behavior to that. And it's that rules-based system that has allowed the United States to be so effective in its economic outcomes over the past 50, 60 years. It's what's allowed the world to be so effective and grow as it has over the past 50 or 60 years. So I would suggest that our policies really need to just be consistent. We need to incentivize the kinds of changes we have historically over the past few decades, and then we just allow ourselves to sort of conform to that over time. The key is, as Bill, I think, has pointed out indirectly, is that the devil in the detail can get quite boring, because it's very minutiae and very detailed, and it's hard to follow, but it's incredibly important. You just let that work happen. You just set the stage to allow that work to happen, and then everybody just sort of follows with what is given to them over time.
So let me just add this. Many of us have been brought up with this idea that climate change is connected with individual actions, that like litter, every litter bit hurts. If everybody would just pick up their trash, there wouldn't be any more trash. It's just, climate change is not like that. It's a much bigger problem than just recycling your coffee cups or what have you. And so I work hard to disabuse people of that notion. And then on a side note, after you have an electric car, you'll never go back. I love you all, but it's just a better car. It's a better driving experience.
I say 505. Once we get to 500 miles and 5 minutes of charging, everybody will adopt it.
For that, you're going to have to go to China. Yeah. And no, the BYD company apparently has just about achieved that. So acceleration performance, road handling performance, it's just everything about electric cars better. This anxiety about range, I understand it, but we'll get over that. And it does not solve everybody's problem. It's just electrical drivetrain is so much more efficient than a heat engine drivetrain. I mean, second law of thermodynamics, I can't change the laws of physics, Captain, and so on. So with that said, electric vehicles have become this sort of straw person problem. But we'll get there. The longest journey starts with but a single step. And there are people that really like driving, that really like living in the suburbs and having to drive everywhere. And so that's another feature and a bug. Back to you.
All right. So we only have a few minutes left for this panel, and so I'm hoping to end things on an optimistic note. So my last question is, what gives you the most optimism about our ability to adapt?
People, you got to be optimistic, or you're not going to get anything done. And you don't go into the ball game thinking you're going to lose. Oh, you will lose, for crying out loud, people. This is the United States. No, we're going to solve these problems. And so let's get started. It doesn't mean you take a Pollyanna approach like everything's going to be fine without any work. But this is a solvable problem. My grandfather rode a horse in World War I. And he lived through it with Wyomir, part of Wyomir. But 30 years later, 20 years later, when his daughter was my mom was in World War II, nobody was riding a horse, nobody who was serious about it was riding a horse into battle. Everything changed. Everything changed. When somebody my age says, I'm going to call you on the phone, I do this. My daughter does this. Because it's a different shape. Everything's going to change. We can do this, people. Let's go. Let's go. Yes.
So I share Bill's sense of optimism, and there are reasons to be optimistic. My other favorite science Bill is Bill McKibben, and he's written a lot on solar recently. So I think there are a couple of things I mentioned. One, I think we largely, short of nuclear fusion, we largely have the technology we need to get there, right? This is not we have to engineer our way out of this. This is an application, an economic and political will challenge. Change doesn't come easy. We are approaching, obviously next summer is the 250th, of the country. A lot of that work 250 years ago was already underway where we are right now. They had no idea at that time, 250 years ago, that they were going to be successful, right? That was a high risk, low level of probability movement. They just wanted to do the next right thing, right? And Mayor Wu was really good about saying in these times of challenge, we don't have to have it all figured out. Let's just make the next right decision. So that's the second thing. The third thing is we've done really big things in Massachusetts and Boston before. So how many folks know the Dirty Water song, the Standells? Do people remember Boston Harbor in the 60s and 70s? It was a disaster. The entire world was betting against us. And they said, technologically, we probably can't clean it. And even if you could, it will break the bank. No one will be able to afford it. You know what I don't get a lot of complaints on in Boston? The cost of water and sewer rates. I get a lot of complaints on electricity rates and natural gas rates. We figured out a way to do it. There was a phenomenal lawsuit. There's another panel on governance and how do you use the Clean Water Act. But we did it. And now there are entire generations of folks that can't imagine us not having the clean Boston Harbor we have. And it unleashed $100 billion in economic value in terms of waterfront development in Boston alone. That's the scale of investment, not the $100 billion, but the Boston Harbor cleanup of about $5 to $7 to $10 billion is what we're going to need to do for coastal resilience in Boston Harbor. We've done this before, folks, and we can do this again, and the technology is with us already.
Yeah, I think I would just add that, so we know what we need to do. We have an understanding of a problem. We know how to fix it. We have the capacity to fix it. So the thing that makes me most hopeful, I think, is that the cultural heritage of the United States, and that is a desire, the future generations desire that the next generation has it better than they have it. I think that story, that narrative is an incredibly powerful narrative. So people that have children, or it doesn't matter if you don't have children, but you like the next generation, you like kids, whatever it is, you want the world to be better for them. And I think that's what gives me the great hope. It's the United States has this wonderful history, not only the sort of know-how, it's the desire, it's the dogged desire to want to do better, not necessarily for ourselves, but for those that come after us. So that's what makes me hopeful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. If we can get a round of applause for our panel today.